Well, good morning. How is everyone? I hope you got all of your walking in the last couple days outside, because we're going to be a little soggy, aren't we? So I am really excited to be here. This is one of my favorite topics. I hope that by the end of it, it will be one of your favorite topics. But one of the things we want to talk about today is that one of our most powerful drives as human beings is for connection with other human beings, right? You see evidence of that everywhere you look. You look around, online, in person, this event, right? We are highly motivated to connect with others, and that does not stop when we go to work. For 3 years, I got to lead the Best Places to Work team at Quantum Workplace, where we studied employee data from thousands of companies every year. And every year when we did the analysis, we came to the same truths sort of emerged about what drives employee engagement. And that's things like employees want to feel valued. They want to feel cared for. They want to be trusted. They want to be appreciated. Right? That kind of reflects our need, our desire for human connection. So it turns out for most people, work is about something far, far more than a paycheck. In fact, for most employees, work is a relationship. So I'd like you to think about some of the most important relationships in your life. Maybe it's your spouse or significant other, maybe a best friend, maybe a close family member. And I want you to think about, how do those relationships feel when they're really healthy, when they're really working? How do they feel? Now, if I were to ask you to write down a list, my guess is that your list might look something like the list I just shared with you. You feel valued, cared for, trusted, appreciated, right? All of those same emotions. So what it turns out is that we have the same expectations of work as employees that we do of any other important relationship in our life. And work's a pretty important relationship. I would argue we spend more time in that relationship than any other relationship we have in our life. And I think when you start to understand that work is a relationship for employees, it starts to explain perhaps why there's such a disconnect still in our organizations, why engagement continues to be low, why turnover continues to be a problem. And that's because while work's a relationship for employees, most of us as employers still think of work as a contract. Right? As an employer, I offer you up a paycheck, and you as the employee in return provide me back some work product of some sort. And almost all of our HR processes are designed around ensuring compliance with that contract. Think performance appraisals, job descriptions, right? All of these things, making sure that the employer gets their money's worth from the employee. So you start to see where this disconnect starts to happen. When you start to think about that, that is not a good combination or a good recipe for a healthy relationship, right? Imagine being in a marriage where your spouse rarely ever either tells you or shows you that they love you, but on a fairly regular basis reminds you of your obligations to them as a spouse and provides you with some feedback on how you're meeting those. Now, I see some heads nodding out there. I'm hoping that's not because that is a descriptor of your current situation. That's a whole different seminar for another day. But you know what? That's a recipe for divorce. And here's the problem. This is the day-to-day reality of so many of our employees. And so we have got to break this cycle. We have got to get out of this dysfunction that we have. We've got to, as employers, it's time to tear up the contract. Because if we really want to, why are my slides running? If we really want to unleash the power of employee engagement in our organizations, it's about creating a more human, connected work experience for our employees that feels like a healthy relationship. And so in order to do that, we have to understand what makes a relationship healthy. Now, for those of you that are really good at relationships, this might seem like second nature. For those of you that aren't, consider this an intervention. You're going to get a double whammy today, right? So let's break down and start to look at what is it that makes for a healthy relationship. And I think there's some core elements that go into making for a healthy relationship. First is appreciation. right? As humans, we crave acknowledgement and validation from other humans. So in our work relationship, we need to feel like our work is seen and acknowledged. Not just when it's been deemed as important, and not just when we go above and beyond, right? But all of the time, because appreciation actually, by definition, isn't just about recognition. Although in HR, I think we've kind of made it that. It's also about understanding. So the simple act of helping another individual know that you have seen their contribution and that you appreciate the effort they put in can go an awful long way. We all know, we've had that experience. We need appreciation every single day at work, particularly on the days when we're getting our butts kicked, right? When we really need it. So appreciation is one. Second is acceptance. Now, if I were to ask you to describe to me your relationship with one of your best friends, like your best friend in the world, it's likely that one of the things you would say about them is that they really accept you, they know you, you can be who you are with them, right? They've seen your good, they've seen your bad, they've probably seen some of your ugly, and they still embrace you, right? They don't judge you, they don't try to change you. That's why they're your best friends. Pretty powerful lesson in there about if we want to make the work relationship a healthy one, we need to create work experiences and environments where employees can show up as their whole messy, good, bad, and ugly selves and feel embraced for who they are, not who we want them to be or who we wish they were. Because when we can show up to work, be our full, authentic selves, when our employees can bring all of that to work, their level of engagement goes up and their performance skyrockets. The data is there. So acceptance. We have to design acceptance. That's a part of a healthy relationship. Should come as no surprise to anyone here today that communication is a big deal when it comes to relationships. We know that communication's a big deal in engagement. I've been doing engagement surveys in some way for well over a decade. I have yet to see a single employee engagement survey result where the employees said, could you please back off on the communication? I've heard you, I got it. It's enough, right? Employees always want more communication. We can always improve when it comes to communication. The reason that communication is so important is because of human nature. As human beings, when we are uncertain or when we are in doubt about anything, when we don't know what the story is, we fill in the gaps. We write our own stories. You know this to be true. And we don't often write great stories. I'll give you an example. How many of you have ever gotten that email from your boss or a higher level up in your organization that just says, hey, I need 30 minutes with you today before you leave? Has anybody got that with no other context? What do we assume about that email? I'm finally getting the raise. Yes. I knew it was coming. I had a good feeling. That is not what usually happens. What do we assume? We assume we're in trouble. Something went wrong. Somebody threw us under the bus. Maybe we're getting fired. Like all these terrible things go through our minds. That's what we do as human beings. And so when we're aware that when we feel uncertainty with negative worst case stories, and we know that that's a natural human thing, that's actually motivated by our survival instincts, because when we assume the worst, we're prepared for it. Right? What's happening above me? Birds, outstanding. Every year it's something. It's better than a Jennifer Hudson sound check, I can tell you that. But when we know that our survival instincts are going to tell us to assume worst case, and everybody does this, to prepare us to not be surprised by that, then that helps us understand that our role in a relationship, in a healthy relationship, is to communicate so that we can identify those uncertainties and doubts and replace those with clarity. Ongoing communication, open communication, honest communication, critical. Number 4, see if we go, support. When we're in a healthy relationship, we hold the other person in positive regard, which means when something goes wrong or they fail, we assume that was due to a bad break or bad circumstances. We don't assume that's because they're a bad person or they have bad character, right? We hold them in positive regard. We also assume their intentions are positive. So if they do something that we don't understand, it's easy to forgive if we don't understand it because we assume positive intentions. This is really important to a healthy relationship. But I would ask you, if you were to pick up a copy of your policy manual in your organization and you started reading through it, does it send a message of positive regard and assumption of positive intention? Or does it send a message of, now we assume you're a degenerate and you are going to do terrible things, and so we've created a policy manual to protect ourselves and our interests, because after all, it's a contract. Right? So we have to remember, if we're going into a relationship, we need to think about how do we create support, because this kind of support creates a sort of psychological safety and freedom that allows us to take more risks, be more creative, and be more free. That's really awesome in terms of relational context. The last thing is commitment. This one seems fairly obvious, but commitment has a couple different levels. On one hand, a positive, healthy relationship requires reciprocity, right? Both parties need to really be invested in the other. You need to be willing to work to ensure the other's happiness and satisfaction. Both directions. But commitment is also about how we repair relationships when they go wrong. So my wife and I have an amazing relationship. I'm blessed and lucky, and we rarely argue, but once in a while, if we're tired or stressed, we'll get into an argument and it feels gross. I hate it. The emotions are just gross. And one of the things that's been fortunate for us over the years is we've figured out how to recognize when that happens and repair it quickly. We acknowledge it, we move through it so that those negative emotions aren't allowed to fester and become something bigger. If we're going to have a healthy relationship with our employees, we need to find a way to do the same thing. We need to be able to recognize when things go wrong or when the relationship is ruptured and repair that. So that requires regular, ongoing conversations. And a courage to step into, hey, when things aren't feeling well, we need to talk about it. Whether I agree or not, sometimes it's emotional and it's messy, but we need to get in and make sure we fix it. So these are for 5 sort of core elements of a healthy relationship: personal life, work. And so if we are to maximize engagement, if we want to unleash that opportunity and potential, we need to figure out how to design this into the work experience for employees from the very beginning, from courtship, of recruitment and onboarding, all the way through to the day-to-day interactions they have with managers and employees. But there is a 6th element, and I think the 6th element might be the most challenging for us. Because it's an obstacle I think we really have to engineer back into our workplace. When I asked my then 7-year-old daughter the question, how do you know if someone loves you? The first thing she said was, they give me lots of hugs and kisses, which for the HR conference, we're going to set that aside. That's not the advice. It's not the advice I want you to take back. The second thing she said is, they spend time with me. Right? Even as children, we understand that we make time for the things that are important. Our children observe this. And so organizationally, this means our managers need to make time for conversations and to be with their people. Our leaders have to make time to communicate and be visible and be connected. We need to make time for employees to be with one another, building relationships and building community and forming their tribe. Because relationships require time. There is no shortcut. And so when we think about work experience design, we have been doing exactly the opposite over the last 30 years in our organizations. We've been engineering for efficiency and lean and all these things. We've squeezed all the social space out for maximum productivity. Relationship formation and the cultivation of relationships is never productive work. But it may be the most important work that can happen in your organization. So time is the last element. So those are your 6 elements. As I close today, I want to give you kind of a simple tool that you can use. So if you're thinking, man, maybe this is right, maybe work is a relationship, how do I go back and start having an impact? It's a very simple tool. I call it the relationship test. Here's how it works. You take any process, policy, interaction that you have in the workplace, and you ask yourself, if I were to take the same process or policy or interaction and I were to do this thing to my spouse or best friend, somebody that I really care about in my personal life, would it help or harm the relationship? It seems pretty simple. Let's use the performance appraisal as an example. right? Because despite all the talk about performance appraisals being broken and replaced and all that stuff, many of us are still running the old playbook, right? So if we were to do a performance appraisal on our best friend, if you were to do it on your best friend, how would that go? How would they feel about you giving them a full year or quarter's worth of feedback all at once? Or even more simply, how would they feel just in general about you piling on a bunch of critical feedback? They probably are not going to love that. That's not what they're looking for from you. So in the relationship test, that would mean I'm guessing it's going to harm the relationship. We're not going to be closer as a result of our performance appraisal. Therefore, it fails the relationship test, which then leads to the second question, which is, how could we redesign this process so that it accomplishes the same outcomes we're after, but that it builds relationship instead of harming it? That's where those 6 elements I just shared with you came in, right? Answering that question by integrating and designing in the elements of appreciation and communication and support in the others is really the opportunity we have to transform our organization. So, relationship test, take it back. I promise you, one of the things that'll be fun later when you're sitting around having a couple hurricanes, start playing out the relationship test with some of your HR practices. See how a job description feels in context of a relationship, a romantic relationship, right? Play it out, because it's lots of fun, and you'll find that a lot of our processes are very much contract versus relationship. So for those of you that are interested and ready, I wanted to give you some resources. So if you would like the slides that I shared today, if you would like, I have a couple of other articles I've written on this topic that might be helpful for you to dig in. If you can right now pull out your smartphone, open a browser and go to gettalk.@smartstage, put in your email address, and you will immediately have an email in your email box that has my slides, the links, and my contact information. So if you want to continue this conversation, we can at a later date. So with that, remember, work is a relationship, and particularly in HR, we need to start acting accordingly. Thank you very much.